Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Dying Railroad Towns. As today we're going to be looking at a railroad town that's not even a railroad town anymore. It's just dead. Something forgotten that existed in the past, long time ago. Just a burning memory now. Today we are taking a look at Norris City, Illinois. As of 2020, Norris City had 1,325 people in the population. But for those who live in Norris City, it was a completely different place back then. For some of you citizens that live in Norris City, Illinois right now, did you know that Norris City was once a railroad town with 2 different tracks? Did you even know that Norris City used to have any railroad tracks? Well, that was when the good times were still happening. But as the wise man once said, all good things must come to an end, and it is unfortunately true. And Norris City, the good times are over. It is literally impossible to rail fan there now because there are no trains. There hasn't been one since probably the 80s or the 90s. But I'm going to tell you about the 2 forgotten lines that used to run through the village of Norris City. Let's begin. So right here is a 1938 aerial view of the 2 lines that ran through Norris City. The tracks going up and down is the Baltimore and Ohio Springfield Division, and the tracks going left and right is the New York Central Big 4 line from Cairo, Illinois to Vincennes, Indiana. Here soon, I will tell you about the 2 lines that ran through Norris City. But first, I'm going to pass this video over to my past self to tell you about the B&O Springfield Division. Take it away, past me.
Alrighty, so let's start with a map here of the old B&O Springfield subdivision. This yellow line right here is the B&O Springfield subdivision where it would go. It would start all the way far, far up in northern Illinois and would head far, far south. It went from Beardstown, Illinois, all the way to Shawneetown, Illinois. And it would cross over with some other big railroads. For example, in Beardstown, the B&O encountered the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. Later on, Burlington Northern. And then up in Pana, it would cross the Chicago and Eastern Illinois. While in Edgewood, it would cross over the Illinois Central. In Fairfield, the Southern. Enfield, the Louisville and Nashville, and so on. But anyways, today we are going to analyze the B&O Springfield subdivision, because this line is not talked about very often, and I'm going to go ahead and explain it for you guys. Alright, so there is not much information about the B&O. Now, there is not much information on the B&O. I don't even know how many trains a day they got. However, though, the B&O line did not seem very busy at all. It was probably busier in the 70s and 60s, but however, though, in the 80s, the line was starting to rot away. And for B&O train symbols, here's an example. There are 2 CSX trains that run on the Ohio sub called Q326 and Q327. In the days of the C&O, those trains were called 942 and 937. There's another set of trains on the CSX called Q334 and Q335. And on the B&O days, that would be called TL82 and GR83. B&O train symbols were unique. And they are kind of similar to NS and CN. They're similar to NS because they use numbers, and they're similar to CN because they use some letters and numbers. So, what trains ran on the B&O? Well, they did have passenger trains a very, very long time ago. But that was, I'm thinking, maybe in the 50s and back. Then later on, it just mainly became a freight line. I'm not sure on the exact amount of trains a day that ran on the B&O. These are photos of the Springfield Local in Rochester, Illinois. The line was hardly ever busy in the 1980s because the tracks were starting to rot away and they were getting into bad shape, as you can tell in these photos. And weeds were growing around the tracks, and trains over there could only top 10 miles an hour. The Baltimore and Ohio was the only railroad to ever own this line right here. Well, that was until 1982. These three photos of the B&O local in Springfield, Illinois, that was the last year of the B&O operating on the line. Because in 1982, the Prairie Trunk Railroad, a short line, had taken over operations on the B&O. Instead of the line running from Beardstown, Illinois to Shawneetown, the line only ran from Flora to Shawneetown now. But the Prairie Trunk Railroad did not last long at all, because in 1985, there were too many miles on the line, and not enough traffic, which doomed the Prairie Railroad, and so the line was abandoned in 1985.
From what I have heard too, I do believe that the Prairie Trunk Railroad had also went bankrupt, which caused the line out of service. This short line only lasted for 3 years, which is one of the shortest lasting railroads that I know of around here. Alright, so now let's talk about the New York Central Big Four line. The New York Central Big Four line had a big purpose in the 40s. When World War II was going on, the New York Central Big Four line was the one that would serve the World War II emergency pipeline trains. They would run tanker trains, they'd run passenger trains. It was a decent line back then, and it definitely served its purpose for World War II. The New York Central Railroad was the one that supplied the war emergency pipeline. I would also assume that the New York Central had ran coal trains on the line as well, because there's photos of a coal mine that is indeed in Norris City. In Norris City, there was also another big piece of history that was in there, which was the Norris City Viaduct, this very tiny bridge, the little evil brother of the 11-foot bridge. And a lot of semi-trucks had trouble getting under there, as you can see. Eventually, though, the bridge was torn out when the line was deemed out of service. This line has had a lot of owners, though. New York Central owned the line. Once it merged with Pennsylvania Railroad, Penn Central owned the line until Conrail took over in 1976. Then after that, the Southern Railroad took over the line, and Norfolk Southern even had the line for a little bit, but they chose to abandon it. When Conrail had taken over the line, though, they instantly renamed the line to the Conrail-Cairo District. And when Conrail had the line, they would run coal trains and mixed freights on the line. And when the Southern had the line, there is a Karnak local. I would assume that this was a bi-directional local, similar to the Evansville and Western Railroad. There's not really a certain answer of how busy the New York Central was, but the line seemed to be pretty busy in the 40s with all the tanker trains and passenger trains that they had ran. Since then, though, the lines pretty much slowly started to die out, and now part of the New York Central has been converted into a bike trail, but not in Norris City. You can still see where the roadbeds were, but neither of these lines are bike trails. Not only that, Norris City did have depots. There is evidence that passenger trains also did run through Norris City. I am just unsure if this depot belonged to the New York Central or the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And that'll do it for both of those lines right there. There's a little bit of information on Norris City where the Baltimore and Ohio Springfield Division ran and the New York Central crossed that. Anyways, before I go though, let's go ahead and check out some remains of both of the lines that ran through Norris City. There isn't much left, but you can still see some remains of where the lines once ran. There aren't very many photos of remains in Norris City, but right here was the former B&O right-of-way. And then right here, taken in 2019, is where the B&O depot used to be. Right here. This is a photo of a B&O passing the depot in 1910. Then there is also the aerial view of where two of the lines once crossed, which you've probably seen earlier. The tracks running north and south are the B&O, and the tracks running east and west are the New York Central. Now, I can't find a picture of where the old New York Central viaduct was once at this bridge. It is torn down now, but there are no photos of where it once stood at, so I have no idea where the Norris City viaduct was once at. And once again, that is going to do it for another episode of Dying Railroad Towns. I hope you enjoyed this. This episode wasn't as long as the others, but I could not gather much information on the New York Central. And plus, well, most of the episodes that I do usually have more than 2 railroad tracks. But yeah, Norris City gets no more trains. And so, instead of calling that a dying railroad town, it should probably really be referred to as a dead railroad town.